just realized I didn't actually press record last. There you go.
Okay. Okay. So 4 years I applied for things, despite having started by doing a 37-foot tall story pole for my tribe. It's kind of the equivalent of being thrown into the water in the ocean to learn how to swim kind of situation. I know that's not the case for everyone, but like I kind of had a false sense of confidence following that, because I was able to do that at the age of 20 at the time. And it was just a social responsibility of elders who had kind of put that on my shoulders that wasn't really in my control, but it humbled me to be thrown into that situation. And also through those 4 years of applying for things, what had happened is to recognize that as a co-Salish person, my tribe, my region there had been this expectation of what Native American art should be. And a colleague of mine, Maynard Johnny Jr. from Vancouver, BC, said the unfortunate part of being co-Salish is that we're between totems and teepees. Like, we don't fit a narrative that people have wanted. And we're having to forge that through public art. And so building up to that, I was just establishing and familiarizing myself with what was differentiating us as a tribe and establish our art form. And that there's a comb made of yew wood, and it's customary to our region. Things that set us apart that were unique, that I wasn't looking to probably make a lot of money on to begin with, but like know that I was dedicated to pick up this regional style and run with it. And I'd done screen printing for a number of years with serigraphs. And the backstory of this, to make things quick, I know we have limited time, was that somebody had said, well, Native art is just all iconography and it's the same. And I said, well, I can't remember who it was, but I had pointed out that this was called Mother and Child, and it's about a single mother and just using iconography as what people would kind of brush off as a day-to-day sort of just something tattooed or something painted on a drum. But the salmon in the iconography here represents the mother, the salmon embryo there above, and the circle of the community. And once I shared that story with that person, eventually, I think it was like a year later, when they were doing our tribal administration, they wanted that. This is a 6-foot diameter powder coated aluminum piece. And it shows that you can take an image and then translate it where you wouldn't normally think that it would fit appropriately, maybe in some space, but it's a combination of the medium, the story, what it means to the place that it's going in. This is the administration building for the Puyallup Tribal Health Authority. And that gave me experience too, to learn partly about the installation process itself. I'm getting frozen here. I apologize, guys.
No worries. Let's see. Do you want to unshare and share again, just in case it's your... Oh, no, it's good.
Okay. So that led from small carvings into larger carvings. This is for the Seattle Aquarium. This was originally in the watershed exhibit, but now it's in the entry since they remodeled. And this is like my earliest work. There are things I do differently, but I mean, we'll say that about all of our work at some point. But the premise just being continuity of like staying dedicated to applying to things and moving along. Let's see. Keeps freezing up. Okay. So this is glass work. I started translating from the printed work into larger pieces. This is on Portland Avenue in Tacoma, Washington. Looking at the top cutout, that's a profile of a traditional canoe style that would be carved for traveling in the river. So it's just taking iconography, putting it into a place where you're making ties, even as loose as they might be. Transportation, like the most ancient transportation of here, this place, is canoes. And now we're just using buses, but the iconography of the salmon, like that we're all connected. One is looking to the future and one's looking to the past, but they're still related. And the iconography at the bottom, kick plates, what they're called, is a very old design that is sort of a shared type of symbolism connected between all the Puget Sound people and Coast Salish from Vancouver, BC. And this is piece Salmon 1, where I started to take my experience from the public works and then start to push that back into studio work and explore some of that. This was part of an exhibit at Seattle Art Museum. And then the carvings painted. This is the Puyallup Tribe's elders building. And just showing part of the process. And again, like integrating these two things where there's a very traditional, what we would call house post format of carving, recognizing the eagles and wolves of our culture, the men and women of our society as they would be in a longhouse, traditional to the territory, and then envisioning the grandmother mountain, which is part of our mythology also, that the salmon and sustenance of our people come from the mountain. So it's visualizing the grandmother mountain as that powder-coated aluminum over the doorway, entering the house. And I started out in an art program with Greg Bell and Barbara Thomas. And I remember Barbara posing a question to us about where we saw ourselves in 5 years. And everybody said they wanted, or what they wanted was a bigger studio space. And she reminded me that Jacob Lawrence had done all his paintings and he never lived in a very big apartment or had a giant studio or anything. And I had created a lot of public work in this small single car garage for many years. So it's not about this space. It doesn't have to be about that necessarily. So I passed that along. So getting the call that you have received acceptance into the public art field, I share this about, what I've learned from the business aspect of working with the team is that it's a lot of moving parts, respecting everybody in that team, note the key contacts, apply the timeline realistically. You have to add, keep into account things are going to come up that you might not be ready for, or something out of your hands, but stay in key contact with the project manager and whoever's on the team, and not leaning so hard on your fabricators that you're working with to solve all your problems, because if you do choose to continue follow whatever work you're doing, whether it's with glass work or metal cutouts, powder coating, whatever those things are. If you lean too heavily on these fabricators to solve everything for you, it's not going to build a good relationship for future work if you do that. And that's something important to understand. And keep aware of budget, the planning a contingency. Again, going back to staying in touch with your project manager. And know it will be challenging at times. I know this, just like friends who have written books say they love to have written a book, but making the book is a different animal. And back to the studio work, kind of pushing where you've lost. I went through a really hard time where I applied for these grants that I felt I was completely appropriate for. I had 20 years of experience behind me. I had failed at getting a single grant out of, I think, 14. And it was so humbling and frustrating to know that I had paid my dues, and I had to kind of gather my senses of like, okay, what am I doing? And I looked again at iconography. I was looking at a painting that my great grandmother had done, an oil painting. She was an oil painter, and just started exploring that and working in digital media on the iPad Pro, and kind of like holding the door open of these ideas that I have of making things sculptural and oil painted, and exploring some very different ideas. And the Pink Door is a popular restaurant in Seattle. But I thought, you know, like integrating iconography of modern place, of where we are, not just old things, because one of our elders here, Ramona Bennett, who is part of our fishing rights struggles, had said Indians have always been modern. We all live in the time that we're born. We're not living in the past, no matter what. And so somebody saw that canvas, and then as they were building up these things, there's a clock behind this, in this box, downtown at Westlake, Seattle, and been there since 1902 or something like that. And so the building owners asked if I would create a wolf image similar to what I had done with that Pink Door, to protect that clock. There, at the time that there were riots going on and things like that. And so just translating what would just be a print, working with Illustrator and Photoshop and with Fabricator to apply these films to the casing that they built up. And this is one of the recent installations, is a more traditional aspect of kind of where I come back to. But these things are kind of going in lots of directions. It's not, I mean, my work is sort of all over the place, but it's still coming from me. It's not singular in one style. And then these are panels, powder coated aluminum. The project for this was within my tribal community, a new building. The timeline was extremely short. And so I had taken these concepts and had to produce them really quickly, and work with a fabricator that I'd known for years, who was actually by chance on the project doing some other things. So working with them to build these and make them dimensional. And then translating graphics into fused glass. This is coming up soon, and on the 23rd, I think. This is in Puyallup, Washington, and this is for Sound Transit. And this will be going up soon. And this is a pole plan for Kobe, Japan, part of the sister city relationship that Seattle has with Kobe. And there was a carver who went there in 1960 named Joseph Hilaire, who I had always admired his work as a pioneer in doing native sculpture. And he created a pole that was heavily damaged in the earthquake they had in the 90s, and they had to take it down. And so I built on this relationship that the cities had built together to acknowledge some of the icons that show up in his work. When people first saw it, they were like, why are you imitating the hats that we make in Japan? And I was like, that's just trying to share these overlaps of our culture in some way, and acknowledge what those are. So I guess it's time for questions. I guess I get to do this, stop the screen share.
Thank you so much, Shaun. Wow. I didn't even know all the things you were working on. Just so incredible. And yeah, sorry about the little bit of tech, but we got through that. This is an opportunity for you to either put questions for Shaun in the chat or unmute yourself and ask a question. I'll be looking through the chat. You do not need to be shy.
I think the most interesting thing to me is the combination of like your own history, culture, and then the place it's going to be, but also the materials, translating materials from one medium to a very different one. That seems to be the essence of making it public, making it substantial. Is that, I don't know if you have any other things to say about that, but I just found that very stimulating to think of, well, what can be translated into what?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Part of the basis for that is actually, it's a combination of things. Just the environmentalism is driven by the values of our culture. Our traditions are not grounded in, we had only made cedar things because that was abundant here before colonization. And it wasn't our responsibility for that becoming scarce the way it is now. So taking responsibility into, okay, what is tradition? Drawing from the surroundings of your environment. What surround us now? Aluminum and glass and steel. So like using those things to the most of getting something out of it. And also recognizing not just the iconography, but the time it's coming from. So when people see it, they'll see parts that are a combination with cedar, elements of glass, and whatever these materials are, but it's a social responsibility driven by values.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Shaun before he has to run away? Well, maybe if you can email thirdwaycreative@gmail.com. And if Shaun's available, I can see if he can answer those. I just love how your practice has grown over the years and being able to see how you're working. You're like one of the busiest artists I know, which is a good thing. So I appreciate your humility and opening up your practice to us today. And yeah, I think I'm gonna bring Marcia back in to move to our next presenter. Thank you so much, Shaun.
Thank you.
Okay. Marcia is somewhere. Or not. I'm like, where did Marcia Iwasaki go? We're having fun tech issues today. It's hilarious. So I'm actually going, there she is. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it working now? Okay, so thank you, Shaun. That was fantastic. So now we have invited another artist collaborative to come help with today's presentations. It's a group called Public Studio Canada, and it's a collective practice with a filmmaker, Ellie Flanders, and an architect, Tamara Solwinski. Am I saying that right? So thank you.
No, you butchered both our names, but
Oh
we'll
my
get
gosh,
there. Not
please.
to worry. Not to
Please.
worry, we'll get there.
Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, geez. Okay. But your work has to do with films, massive, immersive installations with personal, social, and political implications of the landscape. And the themes you have on political issues and ecology and urbanization, they're very exciting. And we had looked at your website and thought, oh, was there any chance we can have you present with us today? And we were so thrilled that you both said yes. So with that, we want to save all of our time for you two to present and share your thoughts with us. So thank you so much.
Our
Okay.
pleasure. I'm Elle.
Okay. Oh.
And that's okay. And this
I'm
is
Tamira.
so.
Thank you so much.
No, we were very happy to be asked and always happy to share. In fact, it's a big part of our practice, has to do with very informal kinds of mentorship. Lots of people ask us stuff because we have different backgrounds and how we've got to this and why we do this. So I think it's often hopefully helpful to be able to share that. So I'm going to share our screen. I'm going to go here. And then I'm going to go into, sorry.
Just have to
Always-
move that tab
I know
down.
the tab is always in the way.
Yeah.
All right. And then we'll go to view.
You want to go to slideshow?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do. All right, there we go. Now I'm gonna move this back again. Okay, all good. So we're just Public Studio, and we kind of came up with this name when we were working in Palestine many years ago, back in 2009, because Tamira was leaving her architectural practice. We knew we wanted to kind of start doing some more. A lot of our work was already very public work, but Tamira had said something about how a lot of architects called their workplaces studios. So I thought like, well, maybe we're a public studio. So that's kind of where we got to with that. And then we were a bit homesick. So we designed this like moose with this bird and all sorts of other thorns and things from the landscape that we were currently in. So just a little background on how we became Public Studio. This is just one slide that we often show that just talks about, who we are. So on the left is a film that I made many years back called 0 Degrees of Separation, just an example of some film work. And this is some example of Tamira's architecture. So I think the one thing we want to talk about that we thought might be helpful is a project we did not that long ago. In fact, it's not even finished. It started, the one thing that's important to know about public art is how long it takes. So this was a commission for Edmonton Light Rail Transit. So we're talking, I don't know if you selected us because we've done transit before, but this is actually our first and only transit, I think, project that we did.
Yeah.
We've tried,
Only successful.
Yeah, we've tried a few others, but this was the one successful one. And it's been a big project and a long project, and many of these are. So I think that's an important thing to know.
I think we won the commission in 2017.
Yeah.
It's sort of just wrapping up now. So.
So this was what we submitted as an example. Hang on, I'm just going to collapse that. This was an example of what we submitted as for the competition. Do you want to talk about this a little bit, how we thought about it?
Sure. As you can see, it's a sort of transit shelter. It's at a stop, and there were a series of four stops that were part of this one commission. Other artists were commissioned to do other series because it was quite a long new line. So at this stop, what we decided to do was a series of kind of what we called them dioramas. We had been visiting, when we travel, we like to not just go to art galleries, but we also like to go to museums. I think we were in New York. We saw the Natural History Museum. And we were also in my hometown of Winnipeg in Manitoba, where they also have what used to be called the Museum of Man and Nature. I think they've revised that title now, but they had these kind of quite old but pretty incredible dioramas, which as we began to research them, they were made a long time ago, and were really meant as kind of educational dioramas, there to kind of teach people about ecology and the environment, but kind of closer to, at least in the Natural History Museum, I think it was turn of the century. And we really loved them. I mean, we loved kind of also how they had aged, but we loved kind of their intention. So here's just sort of a few examples of what kind of inspired us and led us to create dioramas. And what they are is, well, you can see here, these are actual kind of three-dimensional environments. There's a backdrop, but then in front of that, there are kind of, examples of, taxidermy animals stuffed and landscapes created, but the artistry in which kind of the backdrops and the foregrounds were merged was really kind of interesting to us. And we were wondering whether we could somehow accomplish the feel of a diorama, but literally in a flat 2D plane, because that's really all that we had to work with.
So I think the important thing about this project that we really want to talk about was the community engagement piece, because we were asked, as many of these projects go right now, is to engage with the community. And I think it's really important because the community ultimately are the folks who live with the work and have to be inspired with the work around them and grow to embrace it. They have to live with it. And so our intention as artists in this case is we understand our work and our role as public artists is very much about is very different from our own personal work. When we work in museums and galleries and things like that, our approach to our work is very much about sort of, it's about expressing thoughts and ideas in our heads that we kind of put out in the world. Whereas when we work more in the public realm, we take those thoughts and ideas, but we reformat them in a way in which it brings the community on board as well. And not just our ideas, but what is the community passionate about? What do they care about? What's important to them? So often the ideas kind of begin from our place, but they then become a community project. So in this case, for example, Tamara was explaining how we were trying to shift this into a 2D plane. And so what's the community piece of this? The community piece of this was actually to have the community engage in the process of making this work in particular. So we decided to work with, it was a big outreach together with the Edmonton Arts Council, where we asked them to help connect us to the many different communities that we needed connecting to, because we're from Toronto. And one of those communities we thought would be the wildlife photographer community. Sort of just, all the folks you see when you go walking in the park and they've got a camera around their neck. And was there a greater community because they take some of the most beautiful nature photography. So we connected with them, and they tend to be people who are retired. So in that case, we were engaged with an elder community. Then we were working with an artist who's an Indigenous artist from Winnipeg, Dwayne Martineau. And he's a photographer, and we asked if he would create and work together with his photographs.
Edmonton?
Sorry, what did I say?
Winnipeg.
Winnipeg. She's from Winnipeg. I'm from Montreal, but this was in Edmonton. So Dwayne, who's a very talented photographer, worked a lot on the middle ground. So if you go back to how a diorama is created, this would be considered the middle ground here. And then we found a painter who could actually kind of create these backdrops, who was an everyday landscape painter from Edmonton as well, and from the neighborhood where we were doing this project. So these are just some of the nature photographs that were taken. Here you can see some of the midground, and then this is one of the backdrops that was created by the painter. So you can see how this became a completely community-oriented project. Now you may ask, what was our role in all of this if everybody else made the work? But our role was actually creating the compositions that you see. So the compositions here are, they're incredibly difficult to do. This was all intricate Photoshop work. This is another photographer from the area. This was a falcon that he shot.
Just to sort of back up and talk a little bit about the actual scenes, we decided to show essentially, obviously, species that were just kind of from the area. It was very important that all the
And
species
endangered.
were local and endangered. The scenes are also scenes of sort of ecological, well, environments that exist in and around northern Alberta. So we have kind of different, we have a forest scene, we have a marsh scene, there's a prairie scene. What other scene? There were 4 scenes and kind of 4 seasons. So we kind of paired up different seasons with different scenes, and then looked at kind of, this one is obviously focused on birds. Other one has bison. There were beavers. I mean, we can go through and show you.
So this is just an example of it being installed. Like we said, the project isn't finished yet, so we ourselves haven't seen the final installation, but here you get a sense of how we took the idea of the diorama, created it from pieces of work from the community. This is another example of the painted backdrop, the landscape. More wildlife photography in and around the area, wildlife photography, and then the composition. And I don't know if you noticed, but it took us a really long time to figure out how to do proper lighting, essentially stage lighting, theatrical lighting, so that in fact it didn't look quote unquote real, but made these things look more like they were in a museum. To kind of recall the idea of the diorama and highlight the problem of the environment and the at-risk situation that we all find ourselves in with the climate crisis. And that's kind of what it is in its installation. So that's just an example. There's the one that we did with moose. And that's just an example of one project, for instance, that was a very community involved project. We flew to Edmonton. We had many meetings with different community members. We had to contact the Edmonton Art Land Administration Trust and see if they could help us do the outreach and find wildlife photographers. So it becomes a very the community engagement piece can be very long, and it's about establishing relationships very early on in your process. This is another community engagement piece we did called We Are All Animals. And this was right across from Toronto's, it was a residence that was being built across from Toronto's largest park. And what we did in this case is we created a piece of 3 different components. This is a large LED screen that we ended up calling a landscape tableau, 2 stone coyotes, and a bench with the name of the project, We Are All Animals, that lights up out of copper. And I won't go through this piece in too much detail, but this was just to show you a very different piece. This tableau here, it changes seasonally. It's basically made much like a video game environment. And we worked on this with students from our local art college called the Ontario College of Art and Design University, OCADU. And we worked with 2 different classes that helped create the background, which involved going into the park, taking photographs, learning about how to create these things, working in a gaming environment, etc.
I mean, just to explain what the piece actually is, what you're looking at here is, it's a still obviously, but the screen has, it's not actually a video. What it is if you imagine kind of opening up a video game and kind of being in an open game that runs continuously. It does have timing on it. So the scenes that are being shown on the screen are timed, and essentially they go through, here you can see it, they go through the seasons, and they go through different types of weather, and then they have different animals that kind of come and go. So we saw it as this kind of year-long film. That was the idea at the beginning, until the young people we were working with told us, never mind your film. What you really want to do is structure this as a real-time game, which kind of made more sense for what we were doing.
And I think that's an important piece of it. I mean, it was about like working again with a community of people that then help you rethink, like not just what's current, but also like what's important to the community, what's important to them, what are their current interests and mechanisms of understanding the world around them. So we did, in fact, shift our whole concept for the piece to come up with something that was more responsive.
I think the other part of it, you can see the coyotes in the foreground, was that in as much as we embrace technology and want to be kind of contemporary that way, I think we also like to kind of look back as well and sort of bring kind of a sense of craft. You don't sort of let go of that so easily. So it was important to us to kind of marry the high tech of the video game and the screens together with these kind of ultimately pretty traditional sculptures that were carved in stone. You sort of can't get more traditional in terms of public art than stone statues, but we again kind of shifted their aesthetic to a more digital aesthetic. They aren't kind of completely realistic. They're faceted as though, again, they've kind of come from the video game.
So, I mean, I think the last, we won't talk about this very much either, but do we have lots of time?
Yeah,
okay.
Since we have time. So.
Elisheva, do we have more time? How do you want us to?
You have at least 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. So, and then we're going to shift gears here a little bit, because this was a piece we did called Migrant Choir. And I think something important to talk about, especially if you want to talk about it more in the Q&A a little bit, is like, what does it actually mean? What does community engagement mean and community involvement? And I think it's a really complicated, often unsuccessful aspect of doing public art. I think it's really hard to find artists and artists who want to work in a sort of more community engaged way. I know we struggle with it a lot. I don't want to just pretend it's like, oh, we love community engagement or it's so easy. And in fact, it's really, really hard, and it isn't easy at all. And we don't always love it. So we're happy to talk about kind of like where it works and where it doesn't, and when it's necessary and when it isn't, because not every project should necessarily be a community engaged project. So this was a piece we did. Now, this was in Venice at the fancy art show that they have every 2 years called the Venice Biennale. How we got invited there is a long, not very interesting story, but we found ourselves there, and we found ourselves in the midst of the migrant crisis. And when you go to these art fairs, not a lot of people are necessarily all that concerned with things like the migrant crisis. There's a lot of rich people kind of swanning around, and it's just like as if it's totally removed and in its own world. And I guess Tamara and I kind of felt that we wanted to engage the public more so with what was going on around them. And one of the things that you don't notice a lot of when you go to Venice, especially at the art fair, is a lot of people of color. And so when we were there, one of a friend of ours was running this migrant group, and it was a group and kind of a space for people who have just recently arrived, literally who had crossed the Mediterranean in boats, to kind of decompress, to have conversations, to meet other people, to figure out and navigate their way in this new space, and to talk about the actual crisis that they were all facing and had recently come from. So we ended up working with these folks, and together we decided to work on a piece together. And what that piece became was a choir. So this is a very temporary, so this is answering, I think, some of the stuff that you guys sent in terms of thinking about this, your call as a temporary call. This was about bringing a community together, doing something, an action that actually responded to their situation and having a space in which to create that performance. So those were kind of all the elements that came together. So we worked on thinking about what was important in Venice to kind of get across to people. How could we talk about the migrant crisis in a way that would connect people and make them feel connected? So not so much a protest, but rather like, how do we kind of, bring people into a space in a way that was helpful and forward thinking and about togetherness. So
so the way we decided to stage this piece was to, for those of you that are familiar with the Venice Biennale, there's various parts to it. And in one area is the Giardini, which essentially has national pavilions in it. And each national pavilion is essentially an art show kind of by that country. They have artists that represent their country in these various pavilions. So I think what we were wanting to address was kind of this idea of nationalism, who gets to be a citizen, and who's allowed in, who's allowed out. These were conversations that were raging across Europe, and we're very
and who has a voice,
and who has a voice,
literally,
and, especially in Italy, which was a port of a place of landing for many of the migrants. So we had them. We discussed this idea of singing national anthems in front of these various pavilions, and we picked Italy, France, and the UK. And as a group, we kind of learned these songs together, and then sang them in front of the various national pavilions.
Yeah, and not professional singers, any of us, and that wasn't the point. It wasn't about becoming a great singer. It was about doing a collective action. And then these booklets that you see actually contained both we'll go back to the beginning. They contained the actual national anthems and the words, and then there's kind of a story about migration routes, and so it kind of politicizes the idea of national anthems. When did they come into being? Why? What was nationhood in relation to colonialism, the slave trade? So all these things become kind of these subtle kind of questions and issues once you're a little bit more involved. So this was a little video that was on television in Italian, and this was one of the guys in the group that's talking about why. And then with each performance, they made a political statement about where they were from and what was going on, and what some of the rights they were seeking. Sorry, that's our dog in the background.
Siamo qua a cantare per dire a tutti i paesi dell'Europea che l'immigrazione è una cosa che è iniziata da tanti anni fa e quindi siamo qua per protestare, per dire che loro non devono fermare, aiutare le persone che arrivano dagli altri paesi che hanno bisogno di aiuti.
And this is just an example of some of the rehearsal. And then you'll see, I'll just show you the first one where everybody got together and did the Italian national anthem.
Milioni e milioni di persone, linee nazionali, significano ancora frontiere e le frontiere sono una questione di vita e di morte. Ed è per questo che siamo qui a cantare.
All right, so that's just an example. So I think that's what we had. We're actually not going to go through this project. I think we'll leave it there for questions. I'm just going to stop my sharing. And
Such a
there we go.
teaser. I'm like, that sculpture is so interesting, though.
I know, that was mean.
I'm gonna open it up. So questions in the chat. It's just fabulous projects. The tableaus, I'm like already thinking about my own practice or the dioramas. I just thought the way they are showing up are so luscious and vivid and beautiful. And obviously the action in Italy is really important for all the complexities that you mentioned. Let me check the chat. You can either unmute yourself or throw a question in
It'd
the
be
chat.
good to know, like, who's Elisheba, like who's in the room with us here, other than I know you and Marcia and Shaun. But it'd be great to know some of you other folks, if you're not too shy, just to tell us who you are and what you do and why you're here.
I'll
Pretty
start
shy.
probably, whoops. I'm probably the least likely person, I think. I'm Jane Keeler. I'm a really amateur artist and social worker and interested in theater. So I'm just kind of letting my mind be expanded by the many different forms that your work takes, as well as Shaun's. And it's just a fascinating opening for me to think of. Thank you.
No, pleasure.
I'm a retired technician, photographer. I've been exhibiting for 10 or 15 years now, and sort of backing off of it. But recently there's an issue here in Ottawa that I've gotten very involved in, and I'm thinking, I've never done public art, but I'm thinking that it deserves public art. So I'm really here to find out something about it. And yeah, that's it.
Cool. Thank you.
I'm still here. My friend Greg is here. Greg, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi. Hi, everybody. I'm Gregory from Calgary, Alberta, Treaty 7 Territory, Métis Region 3. I'm the interim public art director here in Calgary.
Nice to meet you.
Lisa's got her hand raised, and then Jessica.
Do you want to ask your question first?
Yeah.
Okay.
What inspired you for your art?
Are you asking us or Shaun?
You guys.
Us guys. That's a great question. Lots of different things. I think we're very passionate about the landscape around us, and kind of, I think a lot about making work is about looking. So we look around our environment a lot, and sometimes we see beautiful things and sometimes we see terrible things. And I think we just kind of want to make something from what's around us. What would you say is our inspiration? Walter, our dog, is our inspiration a lot too.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think our practice, if we had more time, we have a little bit of a story around kind of where we started and where we are now. I think we started doing a lot of work in the Middle East. We were very invested in looking at what was happening in Palestine. We did many projects there until we sort of realized, those same concerns that we had over there around colonialism and environmentalism were very appropriate in our own landscape. So we kind of turned our attention here, and we've done a series of projects that I think are very much about the land, and we can't sort of talk about the land separate from politics. The two are kind of entwined. So we did a huge kind of solo show around on this topic of the forest, and I think we get very inspired by the natural world around us.
Just like you. Thank you.
Bit of a long answer.
No.
And then so Jessica, or did Lisa, did you have a question too? Yeah, go for it. Unmute yourself.
Well, I was just curious. I saw this newspaper in our local community, and I'm a single mother who has been off work for quite a while, but I've found I'm always been self-employed and always making work for myself, and I've always been kind of a pseudo artist on the side. And when I saw this, I thought, well, why not just find out more about it? And so thank you for being inspiring. And this is such a great idea, this listener, the newspaper, and these public forums. I think it's wonderful. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have any copies of the listener, but my colleagues showed their face down there, Kristen and Randy. And so everybody who is registered today, I can send them a digital copy of the newspaper that we've been working on here in Ottawa.
There's somebody named Jessica who has her hand up.
Yes, Jessica, you are next.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to introduce myself, and I have my camera off because I'm on my work computer and it doesn't like Zoom. I attended this to see how you're working to help artists apply to public art. This is an initiative I'm extremely interested in, especially for Indigenous artists. And my first question was directed to the first artist that was speaking today. And I think this was great, by the way. I am the Indigenous curator of public art at the City of Calgary. Greg's colleague, glad to see him here. I saw this event on Facebook, and I just want to commend you for the excellent job you've done with the artists here. And I really hope that some of them may be able to come speak for us in the future on this, because I really think a lot more artists should be applying to public art, public opportunities. And yeah, thank you so much for this.
I just want to address that a bit, thank you, Jessica. I want to address that a bit because one of the projects that we've started doing, because we're actually wanting to do a little less public art now, as we're getting older and more tired, is we have a very informal, like it's just people whose work we like, who we've asked to join us, but we've mentored a bunch of people before. Some are young women just out of college. Right now, we've been working with an Indigenous artist from Ontario, from Neshiniming, and which is sort of the Bruce Peninsula area of Ontario. And And it's just that we started working with him on another project, and he was interested in doing some public work, but probably as many of you know, it's really hard to, and I think even Shaun was talking about this, it's really hard to just like get your first commission if you don't have any experience. If you haven't done a public art piece, then there isn't always an opportunity to do it. So one of the things that we do is we work with other artists who are interested in doing more public work, because Tamira's background in architecture lends itself to being extremely useful in public art and helps. So that's just something that we've been doing. And I hope more artists who have already got commissions start to do that as well. I think that's how it works. Pass it on.
Yeah, I was gonna say I wanted Shaun, since he's still here. Thank you for still being. I thought you had to go. Jessica, did you have?
I'm holding on as long as I can. I couldn't turn away from these guys.
Thank you. So Jessica, did you have a direct question for Shaun?
No, I can contact Shaun after, because I'm looking at a series of speakers opportunities like this, like what you've done for the artists here in Calgary. And I think that we've been, you know, our last public art call was, we were actually very pleased. We have two Indigenous, emerging Indigenous artists with successful public art projects for installations in Calgary, which was really, really exciting. But I do, you know, I'm always looking for more speakers that we can bring in to speak to the community and different things that, of course, will start. I could talk about what I'm doing, but I would be interested in asking Shaun if he'd be interested to come speak to some Indigenous artists in Calgary. But that would be a question for via email or something.
Well, yeah, if it's okay, Shaun, with you, I can share your email with her, only if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Ruth, you have a question.
Hi, everyone. Not much of a question, but I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation, and also for addressing some difficult themes like immigration in a way that brings people together as opposed to apart. And also mentioning how hard it is to do public engagement. I think it's one of the harder things I have to do in my practice. We have very similar practice, and I've seen your work, although I didn't know your name. But I'm very happy to get to know more of your work and how sensitive it is to people and to nature. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it seems like a good segue into me and Marcia are now going to talk a little bit about the field. This is a hard group between Shaun and Elle and Tamira to follow up, but we'll do our best. And obviously, I know that some people probably might have to head out. This is recorded, and we're going to kind of go as quickly as possible. We're going to try and keep it to 10 to 15 minutes, but really just kind of thinking about public art, place, and for the people here that said they're interested in the field, giving a little bit more background. And Marcia is unmuted. Yeah, so this is your slide. Go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. So we wanted to start with just a minute, not even a moment, of talking about how public art started, which was in Rome, recognizing emperors and people and leaders that they created in bronze, always on a horse, showing power, and also a more recent piece that was done here in Seattle with Chief Seattle, who is the namesake of our city of Seattle. Are you okay? What makes public art really unique and important to each town and city is that we've all seen a million Tim Hortons, Costco's, Starbucks, the Real Canadian Superstore, et cetera. And every town becomes the same. And the things that keep them interesting and unique are the geography, the people, the parks, and especially the public art. And we wanted to showcase that here. Here are a few examples of public art that you find unexpectedly, perhaps, in walkways, bus tunnels, different places around the cities. And we also wanted to show an example of what we call in the business as plopped art. So it has seemingly almost nothing to do with its surroundings. And the best works are those that are much more site-specific and sensitive to their environment and the people who live there. There's a couple more examples of work that's done in Seattle. This is on the left, an image done by Dan Corson called Sonic Bloom. And this artwork is 5 giant flowers that are solar energized to light up in the night. And then below, you can't see it very well here, but there are these sound systems that as a person gets close to them, they start playing harmonic music. And if you have several people, you can run around and make your own composition. And this is at the Seattle Science Center. So it was done by a different entity. The picture on the right is by Nori Sato in a transit center where she worked with Dan Corson again to create these beautiful spheres that come up and augment this whole transit center. This is our city of Seattle. For those of you who have never been here, please come. We're known for our public art collection. We're the second city in the country who started a Percent for Art program. And people who live here are pretty spoiled and they don't realize how many wonderful works we have in our community. We have over 400 plus public artworks that are in libraries, community centers, sidewalk improvements, fire stations. Every place you go, you see it, and people are sort of used to seeing it, so they're not aware. But now that we show this, they will be. The photograph on the right is from a recent artwork done by Christine Bourdette, a Portland artist, who created what she calls Tower of Burble, which you can see with activated by water.
So, but the field, so a lot of, Marcia talked about some of the old types of things we think, and even Ellen, everybody else, and Shaun talked about, you think of bronze statues, things like that, but public art is much broader. And so I love this quote from Forecast Public Art. Public art plays a crucial role in shaping our culturally vibrant and sustainable communities. Artists of all disciplines are treating public space as a venue for creative experimentation. Public art offers opportunities for community collaboration, for ideas to shape our environment and to influence change. The definition is always expanding. Performance art, interventions, land art, and wrapped buildings are just examples, and artists are redefining public art every day, which I feel like we saw by our two incredible artist teams today. In the 70s, this is from an artist, Jack Mackey, who was working really early on in the Percent for Art field. He said, in the 70s, public art was about art in public places. Today, it's about the art of making places public, which is what really drew me to the field, about this kind of how art really shows us that this space is collectively owned by all of us. We think it's important for you to know, I think everybody else already touched on this today, that it is not your studio practice. You can kind of determine the environment when you work in a gallery or a studio. The public art is totally different, and it's about the site and space. So why do cities invest in public art? Like we said, back in the 70s, they started Percent for Art ordinances. We found that public art has created a sense of pride in communities, brought people together. So it's actually a really important part of civic life. And the term Percent for Art refers to a program, often a city ordinance, where a fee, usually from some percentage of a project or a capital project, is placed in a large scale development in order to fund and install public art. So usually the most jobs you'll see that you'll want to apply for come from most city municipalities, but then there's also independent agencies that do public art projects as well. So we're going to go into really quickly types of public art. Standalone, sometimes people call them plot art or more standalone sculptures. So this piece is by an indigenous artist in the Northwest, Ryan Peterson, on what's called the Confederate line. And then this is a famous piece when they started thinking that they wanted to give like high art to the masses. They gave it's called Chicago Picasso, but it's in Chicago. It's a Picasso piece. But now I think we know that art is not about bringing high art. Public art is not about bringing high art to the masses. It's about representing the communities that live there. This is a famous piece in Seattle called Hammering Man, but it's actually all around the world. Oops, Marcia's supposed to talk about it.
Okay, so this was an artwork selected by the Seattle Art Museum when it was made and moved, maybe almost 30 years ago now, and Jonathan Brodsky was selected, and it was a big conversation on how do you select a large monument that will be in front of a museum. And this is Hammering Man, which Jonathan Brodsky has this goal of creating Hammering Man sculptures all the way around the world. And they are in fact all over the world in different sizes, not to this scale, but some are as small as a few inches. This one is 48 feet high, and the arm goes up and down, and it stops every Labor Day, which is in September. just for the day.
And then I always show this piece by Shaun Peterson, who he's here today. He's a welcome figure in Tacoma, Washington, really beautiful, large in scale, just incredible artwork. I'm going quickly.
Here's Peter
These are, like,
Reich.
again, our standalone pieces. Yeah.
Peter Reichwem, who is also a Seattle artist, is also a fabricator. And as some people are unaware that you don't have to fabricate all of your own work. There are lots of artists who know of fabricators who can create their idea into something that can withstand the outdoor elements or indoor, if that's where the art is. It's hard to see this picture. I don't know, maybe I should move my little people over, but there is a black cat. Do you see it?
Right here.
That is because this is the symbol of the the batteries that last, forgot what it's called, energizing. And the black cat is jumping off of the fire station, ready to save lives.
I think this piece is important. It's a newer piece by Hank Willis Thomas. All Power to the People. It's a Black Power Afro pick that is synonymous in Black people's homes. So I love now that public art is really now getting much more culturally relevant. And so this piece for Black people all over the country means something. And this piece has been cited permanently in Opelika, Florida, but also temporarily in Philadelphia and other places. The next type of art is integrated art. And Marsha will talk a little bit about this really important piece that started the integrated artwork. But this piece is by an artist named Leo Saul Burke, and it's at a ferry terminal. And this is where you get in line at the ferry terminal. You're not even noticing that this is an artwork, but he stained each one of these poles to show the tide lines that are constantly rising due to climate change. And then got this rope dyed this particular color that he wanted. And so the ferry terminal can move the rope however they want to create the lines. But I think it's beautiful that you're actually immersed in the artwork. And that's kind of what an integrated artwork is. It's part of the site that we would say that if you took it out of the site, you would fundamentally change the what that site looks like. So Marsha.
Okay, so as I mentioned, Seattle is known for its public art. And with the various varieties that are out there, the thing that helped Seattle make their claim to fame in the field of public art is a work that you're looking at here. It was a result of a electrical site that was going to be put in a power station that was going to be put in a small neighborhood. And of course, the people who lived there, their modest little one-story houses with maybe 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, they were all upset that there was going to be this electrical substation in their neighborhood. And so these artists, Andrew Keating, Sherry Markowitz, Buster Simpson, all canvassed the neighborhood and talked to people and said, like it or not, it's going to be here. So what would you like to see? And people said, I want to see color. I want to see movement. I want a place that my kids can play and that can walk my dog. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the whole site. Oops,
sorry.
This is the whole site. So you can see where it is. There's a little walkway that's a semicircle that you see. And if you, colorful images, if you go back to the previous slide, Elishba, you can see that it's made up of whirligigs, which are sort of windmill type whirligigs that are made up of found objects that are things like dustpans or fly swatters or toasters, things like that. And it was the first design team project, which meant that the artist was brought on board at the same time as the architect, the engineers, design professionals, stakeholders, so that they had a part at the table and could design the entire concept of the space, not just the artwork. So signage was done, backdrops, and so on. It was a very big deal. And we had people for many years coming from all over the country to see what the first design team project looked like.
Yeah. Oh,
here's Jack Mackey's dance steps, which he has created 8 different dances, which had to do with a sidewalk improvement in Capitol Hill in Seattle. And he had 8 dance steps, which were male and female dance shoes that you can see. And there are things like the mambo, the waltz, the cha-cha. And then he made up 2 extra ones that made up songs, but made up dances rather. And he said this project couldn't work anywhere else in the city, but it was just picking up the vibe of the people who live and work in this area of Seattle.
I love to talk about Maya Lin's Vietnam Memorial. Memorials are usually like bronze figures of people, right? And actually the Korean Memorial has like all these folks in Washington, D.C., like coming out of the trenches. It's actually really powerful artwork. But this piece has all the people who passed away in Vietnam, and their names are just inscribed on this granite. And people, there was something about the subtlety of it and the power of showing the names and the power of the people. I actually got to see this in person, and you start here, and it's important to her that you kind of go into the landscape, and it's like you become part of the land and the people whose lives were lost in the Vietnam War. Applied, we have our friend Kristen here again. Applied can be like murals, tapestries, commissioned paintings. These words can be used interchangeably. So Carolyn de Pellison, this is a piece that she put into a transfer station, or some people call them the dump. And it shows, it's a picture of a landfill next to Mount Rainier, our famous mountain, to really show our connection to waste and the environment. And so having this picture in the landfill, again, is reminding us to kind of think about our own waste. JR is Poppy. I can't pronounce his name very well, but he's really prolific, incredible artist. And what he does, so here in particular, the California Correctional Institute, he took this photo of actual inmates in the Correctional Institute and put it on the ground plane. And so he's constantly doing that in his work to show the power of people, right? So they are of the site, and it gives a humanizing voice and face to these people. Steve Powers, a love letter for you. This is in, I believe, Philadelphia, using text and words to bring people together and think about things. The next type of thing we would call is installation. So this piece is Simone Lean. It's called Brick House. It was on the High Line in New York for about a year. Did you want to talk about Krista? I love Jean-Claude and Krista.
Go ahead.
You want me to go ahead?
Yes,
I'll just
please.
go quickly. But yeah, Crystal's practice was about wrapping things, if you didn't already know. And then he started really working in public works with his wife, Jean-Claude. So this piece was in Central Park, and really guided people through a path and their experience of the park, and really created your relationship to the park changed based on walking through these structures. Candy Chang's Before I Die is a really interesting piece. She lived in New Orleans, and there was an abandoned house next to her. So she wrote this on the house and invited people to write what they wanted to do before they died. And it was wildly popular, and she has recreated this over and over again all over the world. Temporary art or ephemeral art, me and Marsha were debating before this call. We don't really want to call all of it ephemeral, because ephemeral, we think of sometimes things that are just really momentary. The piece that I have here is super cool. It's by Javier Tellez, One Flew Over the Void, where it's on the border of Tijuana and San Diego. He invited citizens and visitors and patients from a local psychiatric hospital to come and wear masks and wield signs. And the performance ends with him going into a Cuban cannonball being shot over the border of the United States as a defiant act that transgresses social and political boundaries, literally and figuratively. So I love that art can be this, right? Art can be you flying over the border and talking about border relations. Another piece I love is Paul Ramirez Jones' Key to the City. It used to be you would give dignitaries or celebrities this key to your a fictional key to your city to say like they're really special. And Paul really wanted to be egalitarian about that idea, and created all these keys that anybody could have, and opened up parts of New York. So this was like a bridge to part of the bridge that was normally closed. There was a door in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So these keys literally opened up different parts of the city that were not accessible to people and made it accessible. Really incredible project. Post Commodity is a group of indigenous artists from all over, there are like 3 of them from all over the country, or different tribes. This is Repellent Fence that was on the border again as well. And they're taking kind of the imagery of indigenous medicine and they said that this looks like a medicine eyeball, and then really using that to think about border relations. And the way they talk about this is when we talk about the border, they say that we don't talk about indigeneity, and really thinking that before we talk about US or Mexico, we need to think about indigenous first. And then now we're going to really talk about site-specific projects really quickly. We're doing good, Marsha.
Okay, we'll talk quickly still though. This is a project that is in front of a fire station in Seattle. And this was done, oh gosh, 30 plus years ago, when when people would come to the fire station to get their blood pressure taken. And what the artist found out after spending time there, almost with every project, the artist is required to spend time in the community where their art will be created. And in this case, the artist found out that there were many people coming to the fire station to have their blood pressure taken. And this is 30 years ago, so there weren't machines available readily at your pharmacy. You had to go to the doctor's office. Instead, people would go to the fire department, and people had no place to sit. And so the artist, Ellen Ziegler, ended up learning about different folk tales that had to do with fire. And there's a Japanese one that had to do with a mountain where a farmer was at the top of the mountain and he could see that a tsunami was coming. So he lit his field on fire so that all the people in the village below would run up with water. And in doing so, he saved the village. And each one of these stone seating elements is the shape of the text that I just talked about. And this is held up really well and is still a favorite of many people who love fire station public artworks.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So I have this really great quote about site specificity. I can never say the word. Site response in art occurs when the artist is engaged in investigation of the site as part of the process of making the work. The investigation will take into account geography, locality, topography, community, local, historical, and global history, local, private, and national. These can be considered to be open source, open for anyone's use and interpretation. This process has a direct relationship to the artworks made in terms of form, materials, concept, etc. Of course, artists, like anyone else, respond to these raw materials in individual ways. And so moving on from that, a really incredible artist, Matthew Mazzata. This piece is Open House. I can't remember what community it is in the South, but he worked with them to take this barn structure that already existed. They wanted to have a place where they could have music festivals. And so it actually transforms into a stage, and then you can put it back when you don't need it to be a stage. And he worked with the community to build this piece. So his process is listening, seeing what people need, and then working with them to develop what the community really wants. I love this piece by Perry Howard. It was in the skate park. It was in the skate park in Seattle. I think it'll be relocated. But it looks, this just looks like a painting. But what she actually did was she listened and talked to skateboarders for a really long time. And she knew that skateboarders are a particular group of people. And if they didn't like the artwork, they would trash it. And she listened to it for a long time. And so what she did was she scanned the under parts of skateboards in how it's all scratched up, and that's what these are. And it was so beloved that it never got hit with graffiti or anything from the skateboard community. So here's some other photos of the skate park. Marcia?
By Jen Dixon, who is another Seattle area artist. And she has created this work that is along a bikeway, and it played a lot of attention. Her inspiration came from Playland, which was like an amusement park back at the turn of the century. And she was inspired by one of the biggest amusement rides, which was like a Big Dipper kind of roller coaster. So it has 13 different dips, and this is just a partial photo of it, as you can see. And it's all made out of recycled signage that came from Seattle Department of Transportation. And they're all kinetic, they all move. They're very fun, and people love happening upon them.
The last one we're going to talk about here is Kara Walker, A Subtlety, which was a project from Creative Time, which you should totally look up if you don't already know. They are a private, nonprofit public art agency that does temporary artworks only. They don't do permanent. But they had an opportunity when the Domino Sugar Factory went out of business to commission an artist. So they commissioned Kara Walker. This was her first public piece. And she created, now obviously the sugar factory has a lot of history in Black communities, from plantations and et cetera. And she played on that particularly and created the Sphinx of a Black woman. And I think all the intersections there are really important of the site, the location, and the material, right? The Sphinx is literally made of sugar. And people, I wish I could have seen it in person, but everybody said you could smell the sugar. It was smelt sweet. So it was really incredible to be in the presence of her. And so this is, we're almost done. This is a quote from former curator at Creative Time. If art is a dream, it is a dreaming best done in and with the public. And that makes me inspired to keep doing the work in the field that I do. I believe that I'm dreaming with everybody else in public. Marcia has some resources, and then we'll see if there's any questions, and we'll end this week's session.
Okay, I just wanted to illustrate a document we put together. Elishma and I have been trying to expand the field of public art rather than having all white males in the field. We have really tried to reach out to underrepresented artists of all ages, all types, all ethnicities, all sexualities, and so on. And we've been doing these training sessions for 7 years, and I did some before that, and trying to reach out and mix up the field a lot, because it's a tough field and not everyone should be in the field of public art. I would say the important things is that they're good people, are good listeners, that they're willing to collaborate with others and all the stakeholders, of which there are many people, but they still have to be able to keep their own voice and their own artistic vision for a project. And that's a hard balance to do. So in that, we had a series of what we called Public Art Boot Camp, which was much more intense training that we did it for the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture for 4 years. And then we have gone on to do it for other communities around the country. I had asked each of the presenters, of which we had over 60 at the time between 2015 and 2018, to tell us their 5 best tips that you wish somebody else had told you when you started the field. And so in this document, which you can find, if you look up Seattle Office of Arts and Culture and go into 5 best tips, you have to go
I'll
into
send the link when I send
okay,
the link to the call. Yeah,
that would be great. So we wanted to show that because there's tons of information that will help you know how to navigate the field. And so that's what I wanted to share with you to see as well, because it's a great resource. There's also Americans for the Arts have a public art resource center, which you can also find, and lots of tips. But really, for those of you who are beginning in the field, we really encourage you to look at temporary art projects initially, because nobody's going to hire you to do a big $30,000, $50,000, $100,000 project if you have no experience doing anything at all in the public realm. So temporary is really a great way to start.
And that was what we wanted to say about the field. So this construct will be the same for the next 2 weeks. We'll have 2 artist presenters, one from America, one from Canada. The next one is, like I said, Michelle Campos Castillo from Edmonton and Kalina Chung from Seattle, talking about how to take your studio practice to a public practice. And then me and Marsha will show other examples of artists who have studio and public art practices. And then the last one is building your concepts for public art, again with Marissa Gallimet from Ottawa, and then Christopher Paul Jordan, who is from Seattle and now is in Connecticut. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at thirdwaycreative@gmail.com. And like I said, everybody who registered today, you will get a copy of the listener, a link to the call, and a link to the best tips. We hope to see you again. And if you have any questions, let us know.
Great, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us. We really are excited about the field, as you can tell.
Greg's still here.
Okay.
Hi, Greg.